as an impact manager, you're still telling a story, even if part of that role is helping people to think about their plans and their ambitions and where they think their research is going and how they want to make the world a better place. But that in itself is a story, and you're trying to help people see what that story might look like and how you can make it reality.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Welcome to episode 17 of the Research Adjacent podcast. This is the first episode of my new fortnightly schedule, but the format is what you've come to expect, the career story of an interesting research adjacent professional. Before I introduce today's guest, I just want you to remind you to sign up for the Research Adjacent Roundup newsletter. The newsletter is a mixture of podcast updates and interesting things that I've discovered. The first edition of this monthly newsletter came out last week, and it included links to a Padlet that I've created with lots of resources for navigating research adjacent careers, as well as some interesting blogs and reports that I've been reading. You'll find a link in the show notes for you to sign up for next month. So, on to my guest. This episode I'm talking to Edwin Colyer. Edwin is the Manchester-based founder of the science communication and impact agency Scientia Scripta. His journey, like mine, involves weaving in and out of self-employment and doing a variety of research-adjacent activities. But first and foremost, Edwin is a storyteller. For over a decade, he told stories about science as a freelance writer, and then he became an impact manager and told stories about impact, and now, through his agency, he's beginning to help create those research impact stories rather than just telling them. Listen on to hear his journey. Welcome along, Edwin. Thank you for joining us for this episode. I wonder if we could begin by inviting you to tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, that's a good question because I'm not quite sure what I am myself, because I'm in a bit of a new space compared with I have been. So until last summer, I worked as an impact and public engagement manager at Manchester Metropolitan University. Did most of a ref cycle and the joys of impact case studies and supporting that. And then I decided I was up for a new challenge. So went back into my business that I'd had before joining the university with a view to building it. So not quite going back to freelancing like I was before, but actually trying to grow the business around science communication, which is what I'd been doing traditionally, but then working out how to bring in that expertise in public engagement and impact that I'd developed at the university. So early days, still trying to work out how it all ties together and is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about your company, the name of it, and what you're kind of hoping to do.
Okay, so I was thinking about this earlier, and it's a fine example of a circular economy because it feels like I've gone on a big journey and then ended up back where I started. So I started out, I kind of left university, or I went through university doing science. I did biochemistry, but discovered that I really didn't have the patience for actually doing science. And thought, oh, maybe this science writing thing is my cup of tea, which was at the time in the late mid-90s, was just starting to become like a recognized career in itself.
Yeah, it's about the same time I got into it.
Yeah. So I ended up then doing history of science as that transition between something that was sciencey and something that was very wordy, and really loved that. And then literally just started freelancing. So as a science journalist, so writing feature articles for newspapers, magazines, and all of that, and slowly moved from more of the bylined journalism to copywriting and working for universities and research institutes. And I did that for many, many years until, 2013. 2012, 2013 was the first time that impact became a thing in the research excellence framework. And I ended up freelancing for 3 or 4 universities to support their impact case studies, and really loved this idea of impact and thought it was a great thing, and it was science being useful, and the case studies were telling really good stories about science. So when this job came up at Manchester Met, just down the road, I sort of jumped at it and thought, yeah, I really want to do this impact stuff. So that's how I ended up becoming an impact manager. And it was a very big change from having freelanced for nearly 20 years. So I did that for 6 years. And then, I got itchy feet. I had warned my employer that I wasn't very good at keeping my head in one job for very long, but I kept it up for 6 years that I was very proud of. And then decided I'd go back to my business and kind of become my own boss again. So it was almost going back to where I started, but with more bells and whistles attached.
Yeah, and it's interesting that saying there that it sounds like we both came into this kind of world around about the same time. And you mentioned some of the changes and things that you've seen along the way, but you almost feel like you've come back round in a circle. How has that sort of journey panned out for you, these changes in the world that we work in?
Yeah, so I describe myself, and still in my head, I think of myself as a scientist, even though I've never done an honest day's work in a lab, apart from during my sandwich placement when I discovered that it wasn't for me. But because I've been in that research space, and it's usually science and engineering and medicine and life sciences, I still think of myself like a scientist and I see the world through a very scientific lens. But actually, I'm more of a creative. I'm more of an arts person because I play with words, and it's about telling stories. And that core skill has been at the sort of the backbone of everything that I've done. So obviously when I've been writing, it's about telling stories with words. But even as an impact manager, you're still telling a story, even if part of that role is helping people to think about their plans and their ambitions and where they think their research is going and how they want to make the world a better place. But that in itself is a story, and you're trying to help people see what that story might look like and how you can make it reality almost. And then obviously writing a case study is telling the story, and all the research and investigations and analysis that goes into a case study is very similar to being a journalist, where you're going around, you're getting sources, you're getting data, you're talking to people, you're interviewing them. All of that is essentially doing the same thing. So the biggest jump for me from going from a freelance writer and journalist position to an impact manager, the biggest jump was actually like working for a big organization and having a boss rather than the nitty-gritty of the day job.
Yeah, it's interesting there as well. You talk the way you talk about journalism and the way you're kind of going around and gathering information and putting together the story. That's kind of like science as well, isn't it? It's that you're finding out what's the problem, you're gathering information. And a lot of the people that I speak to really see science as a very creative thing as well. So I think perhaps just it's connecting up all those different skills.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
And I think I've come to realize that more, having been in the university and encountered all these amazing people doing brilliant research. And you start to realize that planning projects and experiments and coming up with the ideas, and even the literature searches and reading about prior work and all of that activity is really creative as well. And when people turn around and say, "Oh, I'm not a very creative person," now I'm just like, "You totally are."
Yeah.
Science is such a creative activity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree that that everybody everybody in what they're doing is creating something, even if they don't think of it in those terms. Just because you can't draw a person or a duck or whatever it might be, and that is definitely me. I paint pictures with words, I suppose.
Yeah, lovely way to think about it. So you've hinted at the fact there that perhaps having a boss wasn't such a great scenario for you. What other kinds of challenges have you faced along the way?
That actually, to be fair, having the boss was not a problem.
Okay.
I did knuckle down. There's a famous conversation that came to haunt me on a frequent basis where I was asked in my job interview how I would cope with working for a big institution, having worked for myself for so many years. It's like fantastic question. I turned it on its head and essentially said, "Well, how will you cope with me working for you when I don't follow all the rules?" And I was told that the university liked mavericks, and it was a term that I came back and used many times to justify not following rules. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a great experience, and I've learned, I learned so much from it. In terms of challenges, I suppose because I've been around the block a few times, I've got quite a lot of learning behind me. So one of the things that before I took the job at Manchester Met was that actually working for yourself is quite a lonely business. And it's probably less now when we're also connected with Zoom and post-pandemic. We've got maybe better at that digital connectivity. But back in 1997 or 6 or whenever I started, and the internet was on dial-up, and you switch pictures off. You switch pictures off to save you money. It was quite lonely. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think over time that built up. So when I got the job, I was really looking forward to actually working with people face to face and in a team.
Yeah.
But yeah, so working for yourself can be quite a lonely existence. So it's really, I've learned that having other people around that you can talk to and finding that balance of interaction is really, really important. And what's nice now is because I'm now building a business and having a team, and there's more people in the business than just me, and recruiting and all of that kind of stuff. It's completely different kettle of fish than freelancing for yourself. So it feels like I'm part of something bigger, which is great, really.
Yeah. No, that's really nice. And yeah, I can see that maybe having had that experience being in the university and having the colleagues, then that's not something you maybe want to be in a different situation, but you don't want to lose that relationship with other people.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have those relationships, and by being in that team and being part of a bigger organization, I can now translate a lot of my experiences and what I learned and what I observed in being in a big organization. I can now pick and choose how to apply that in Scientific Scripter. So what do I want the culture to be like? How do I interact with colleagues? All of that kind of stuff is stuff that I would have never learned about unless I'd been part of as an employee.
Yeah, it's a really valuable learning experience then. Well, I'm sure that over your 25 years and what you've done some things over the years that you're really proud of. I wonder if maybe you could tell us a few examples of things that you've worked on.
Yeah, so some of this is going back to other previous stuff, because I've only been working in my own business full time since last July, so it's early days in Scientific Scripter, the return. But yeah, I've had some pretty cool things over the years. So one of the pieces of work I really loved was copy editing one of David Attenborough's books to go with his First Life TV series.
Yeah.
So it was written by somebody else, but I contributed to the copy editing process.
Yeah.
I think my name appears somewhere in the acknowledgements in small
In the
print.
very small writing somewhere, yeah.
But that was a really creative experience.
Yeah.
And part of what I had to do was watch some of the early edits of the show
Mm-hmm.
and try and conjure up that same feel that went into the book. And again, it was very creative writing to try and tell the stories of the early life on Earth in words. So that was a fun piece of work. I really like the writing when you have that creative freedom and you can really bring in that storytelling rather than the more functional writing that's about conveying information, or you're doing marketing or whatever it is. When you can really start to play around and get those more evocative storytelling and pictures going, I really, in fact, one of the very first pieces I ever wrote, in fact, probably the first piece, was actually for New Scientist. I got lucky.
Yeah.
I got lucky, and I remember I did a course with them, and they talked about this idea of you've got to paint a picture, and you've got to suck somebody in right at the beginning so that they're hooked. And I've always, tried to remember that that's what you need to do with a good piece of writing. So that was a fun piece. Obviously, my portfolio of impact case studies from when I was at Manchester Met, I'm very proud of. And some of those in the units have divided into different disciplines, and some of the impact case studies in their particular units of assessment ranked really highly nationally.
Yeah, brilliant.
I can't take all the credit for that. Whilst I drafted the pieces, it wasn't my impact.
Yeah, but still, you told the story of it. Having written an impact case study myself, I know how important it is to get that story across.
Yeah. And just hot off the press, one of the final things I did whilst at the university was, so I ended up having a bit of a side hustle while I was there. One of the professors, Keely Crockett, who I was working with around an impact case study, she was doing research on the ethics of AI. And I got really, really interested in this and started supporting her around policy engagement locally and nationally. And we ended up doing a bit of research together. And we sort of bounced off each other quite well. And I pushed her to do stuff that maybe she wouldn't have considered doing on her own. I'm quite pushy like that sometimes. But one of the things we did was develop a research project, and I was pretty influential in coming up with the idea and the design. And it's all about training and then supporting AI and data scientists in sort of to integrate community engagement into their research process, which is quite radical, and it's very interdisciplinary, and it's probably not done that much in AI research at the moment, even though our research showed that public involvement and diversity of voices in the development process is absolutely critical to sort of developing more ethical AI. So anyway, we got this we developed this project, and I worked on the funding application, and we got it. And then I left. But I'm still involved in the project, and we had the first training session yesterday. And it was very emotional. I was really I was quite surprised by my reaction, but it was the first event of the project.
Yes.
So the first training session. So and it was very emotional to see how an idea that had then been expressed through a funding proposal had then been lots of other people, the project team had got the vision, and that was being translated into the actions and the events and the activities of the project. And it was just like oh, my baby's coming to life.
Yeah, and seeing
Which
that
is,
full circle. I imagine with some of the stuff that you worked on before, early in your career, yeah, you kind of have an idea and you put in an article and you see it published, but it isn't quite the same as a kind of more longitudinal sort of thing, seeing that come to life.
yeah, and so like you say, when you publish an article, it just goes out there
Mm-hmm.
into the void, and people may read it or may not.
Mm-hmm.
You never really find out how important it has been as an article, unless obviously you get an amazing scoop.
Yeah.
And impact case studies are all retrospective as well, so it's telling a story of something that happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So this, where you're actually thinking about how to design a project and now delivering it
Mm.
and realizing that actually it's got potential to be quite pioneering and influential is quite a new feeling really. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, clearly one that's really hit you as well.
Yeah, I was really surprised by how how I reacted yesterday.
Yeah. Oh, well, and incredibly topical at the moment as well,
Absolutely,
AI.
yeah,
So
and
yeah.
maybe that was it. Maybe it was just hit the sweet spot of topic.
Yes. It can be quite satisfying when that happens. You feel you're very zeitgeisty.
Yeah, so at
Yeah.
least if Chat GPT puts me out of a job with words, I can go back and do some AI projects.
I've just been having a conversation earlier today with some people who work as writers and copywriters about the terribleness of AI. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but saying that they've been playing around with it and we're not very impressed at all. So maybe we'll be in a job for a bit longer. So speaking of that, you mentioned a bit there about this very new project and your new business. What are you thinking that the future might hold? What are your hopes?
So I've got ambitions for
Mm-hmm.
how big to grow the
Mm-hmm.
project and where it is we want to go, but it's still very early days, and I've been I've been told by people who know much better than me that in order to have run a successful business or operation, you need to be very laser focused about doing one thing well. I'm not very good at that. I've got a feeling that, like the maverick at the university, I might be a bit of a maverick in terms of building my business because
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in lots of things and
Mm.
I'm quite experimental and want to try different things. So just in terms of the nature of the business, we're doing science communication,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also doing some public engagement, and we've got expertise in terms of impact and
Mm-hmm.
impact planning and monitoring and reporting on that. So that's already three things
Yeah.
we're playing with, and people have told me you just need to focus and you need to be able to tell your story really well about what you do and why it's valuable for people. But I'm probably too interested in too many things for that to happen. So, in order to make it work, I'm just going to have to build three teams and then work out how they integrate together.
I think it's
So,
hard sometimes because
always
these things
ambitious.
they're so connected, aren't they? And it never made a lot of sense to me. It's part of the reason behind this podcast is it never made a lot of sense to me to separate them out too much because they're so interrelated.
Absolutely. And one of the key jobs as an impact manager is that you just ended up talking to loads of people about their
Mm-hmm.
work and you knew so much about what was going on the other side of campus
Mm-hmm.
that quite often one of your key roles was connecting people,
Mm-hmm.
even in the same institution, who didn't know each other and didn't know that they were working on very similar things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that it's great to also have that connectivity role.
Mm-hmm.
I really value the networks that I've built up, and you start to see patterns that other
Mm.
people don't because you've just got all these really interesting connections going on, which is great.
Yeah. Oh, well, that leads very nicely then on to inviting you to tell us about some of the people that you work with or that work in a similar field who you would like to give a little bit of a shout out to.
There's so many people.
Uh,
Uh, so well, in terms of shout out, I have to shout out to the rest of my team. So Eva and Holly, who put up with me and have essentially put their faith in this project to build the business. So they're putting careers and everything else on the line, and are still going for it. So I think that deserves a medal, putting up with me. And we're learning as we go along. So, but it's been really good so far. And then I suppose in a similar vein, for the people that had to put up with me while I was at the university. So my manager having to deal with the maverick in the team.
Yeah.
I don't think I was a maverick. I think I actually towed the line quite well. And then the other impact managers that slaved away. So that's Laura and Catherine and Helen, who between the four of us, we got the university's impact submission over the line. Okay. And then just over the last year or so, some of the projects that I've been working on have been absolutely great. So we've got an interesting one with the Centre for Process Innovation, which sounds really boring, doesn't it? But actually, so they're one of the like the catapult families. So they're in that space between universities and commercialization of things. But they've really got a really strong attitude to communication and communicating their science and measuring and reporting on their impact. So there's just a lot of great synergy between what they're hoping to do and what we can actually provide them. So that's brilliant. So Tori, who also did the MSc in science communication at Imperial, she was sort of our contact there, and she was doing some great stuff and has just left, but I'm going to keep working with her to try and build up a Greater Manchester science communication community, because we both recognise that actually over probably only the last 5 or 6 years, it's becoming a thing in Manchester now. That there's organisations moving in like CPI, and there are some other agencies doing science communication and PR. So we think there's enough of us in the city to maybe build up a bit of a community and get something going there. So that'll be quite exciting.
That's something that if anybody's listening in the Manchester area, something to keep
absolutely
keep
get in touch
for. Yeah.
So that's just a few of the amazing people. The great thing about the job is you get to work with some brilliant people every day.
Yeah, fantastic. And you just said there, get in touch. So if people do want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn is probably the best place. I did one of those scary things, which is Google your own name. And I've discovered that whilst my background is all about communication, my own online presence is terrible, because I've gone through life thinking that there's nothing I have to say that anyone wants to listen to. So the best place to find me is probably LinkedIn or Google Scientist Scripter, and you can find us that way. So that's
great. We'll get those links and put them in the show notes as well, so people can find them easily. Yeah,
brilliant.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to come and have a chat today. That's been really interesting.
Cool. Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been great fun.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links under the episode to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the Research Adjacent Roundup newsletter. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.